Imagine, just for a second, taking one of history's most famous, sharp-tongued, fiercely independent rebels.
Oh, this is a fun mental image.
Right. So imagine the playwright, George Bernard Shaw,
Hmm.
and dropping him straight into a stiff 19th century boarding school.
Wow.
Yeah, just picture the rigid routines, the identical uniforms, the relentless bells dictating every single minute of the day.
Sounds like a nightmare for someone like him.
Exactly. You'd think a mind like Shaw's would be completely crushed by that environment, or, well, more likely, he'd be expelled by Tuesday for trying to burn the whole system down.
Yeah, it seems like a complete mismatch. I mean, we tend to view highly regimented traditional environments as the ultimate enemy of independent thought.
Right.
The assumption is generally that strict rules stifle creativity and that to build a genuinely free thinker, you basically need to remove all the boundaries.
But that is exactly why today's deep dive is so utterly compelling. We are exploring a source document titled, What a Boarder Can Learn from George Bernard Shaw. And the core argument it completely flips that assumption on its
It
head.
really does.
So the mission for you listening right now is to figure out how taking Shaw's intense intellectual rebellion and injecting it into a highly regimented environment doesn't actually destroy the student, or the school for that matter.
Right, right.
Instead, balancing that strict, predictable structure with fiercely independent thinking actually creates people who are adaptable, wildly capable thinkers who are, ready for our incredibly complex modern world.
It's just a brilliant paradox. The philosophy laid out here suggests that these highly structured, almost enclosed ecosystems can serve as the absolute perfect incubators for questioning assumptions.
Which is wild to think about.
It is, because the boundaries aren't there to imprison the mind. They are there to provide a safe resistance, like something solid for a developing intellect to actually push against.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we really need to start where this framework begins,
Yeah.
which is Shaw's massive disruption of what it actually means to, quote-unquote, learn.
Yes.
Because boarding life is defined by its assessments. I mean, there are constant tests, deeply entrenched expectations, and established ways of doing absolutely everything.
Every minute is accounted for.
Exactly. And when you are faced with that barrage of assessments, the default survival mechanism for almost anyone is just to memorize the material, pass the test, and move on.
Which, to be fair, is incredibly efficient in the short term.
Sure.
You ingest the required facts, hold on to them just long enough to fill out the exam paper, and then immediately flush them from your working memory. The system kind of rewards this.
Yeah, it does.
But Shaw's philosophy argues that this is fundamentally hollow. Like, true education isn't about data retention at all. It's about developing the capacity for critical reflection.
So memorization is basically just the gathering of raw materials. But I'm genuinely struggling with the reality of this. If an institution is fundamentally built on strict schedules and standardized testing, aren't they basically designed to manufacture followers?
Oh.
I mean, memorizing facts feels like just downloading a static map of a city to your phone. It gets you from point A to point B today. But Shaw is seemingly asking students to learn how to navigate when the map is completely wrong or off-road entirely.
Right.
If the school actually wants them to think, why are they spending so much time forcing them to memorize the map?
What's fascinating here is that the framework doesn't advocate for burning the map. It doesn't say to ignore the minimum academic requirements.
Oh, so you still have to pass the tests.
You still have to pass. Those baseline facts, the history dates, the math formulas, the grammar rules, they are the grammar of reality. You need them.
Okay, that makes sense.
But intellectual growth only actually occurs when a student uses that structure as a launch pad rather than, a finish line. The map is necessary, but Shaw wants the student to realize the map is not the territory.
Got it. So it's the difference between knowing the route and truly understanding the terrain.
Yes, and understanding what to do when the bridge washes out. When a student starts asking thoughtful questions during a standard lesson, or when they pause to reflect on competing viewpoints rather than just swallowing the first answer handed to them.
They shift from being passive to active.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They shift from being a passive consumer of education to an active participant. They aren't just downloading data anymore, they are interrogating it.
Wow. But that requires a massive shift in curiosity, doesn't it?
Huge.
Because the document stresses that they have to show genuine curiosity about the world around them, not just, what's going to be on the final exam next Tuesday.
Right.
But let's look at the psychology of that shift for a second. When students move beyond those minimum requirements, doesn't that inherently make them a problem for a rigid system?
You'd really think so, but the analysis actually shows the opposite.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Students who engage this way don't become worse students. They become significantly more confident. The structure of the boarding environment, the very thing that looks like a cage designed to manufacture compliance,
Right.
it actually becomes a psychological safety net.
Oh, I see. Because the rules are so clear.
Exactly. The student knows exactly where the boundaries are. So when they begin to exercise independent thought, they aren't just floating in a void. They have a really solid foundation to anchor them while their mind explores.
But that creates a massive, almost explosive problem, right?
How so?
Well, once a student starts thinking independently, once they realize they can actually question the map, they are inevitably going to run into conflict.
Oh, for sure.
They're going to disagree with their teachers, their housemasters, their peers. And Shaw was famously known for his incredibly sharp wit and his absolute refusal to back down from a strong opinion.
He really was.
So how does a student channel that kind of energy without just blowing up their entire community?
Well, that brings us to what might be the most vital skill discussed in this entire deep dive, which is the art of the respectful challenge.
Okay.
See, Shaw wasn't a contrarian just for the dopamine hit of causing trouble. His framework shows that questioning established ideas is an art form. It is a highly specific, intentional practice.
And what did that practice look like?
Mostly, it requires stripping the ego out of the disagreement.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here, though, because we are talking about human nature in a total pressure cooker. We are talking about teenagers.
Yes, high stress.
Teenagers living away from home, swimming in hormones, dealing with academic stress, intense social hierarchies. Usually when a teenager challenges authority, it is driven almost entirely by ego or frustration or just a desperate need to assert independence.
Absolutely true.
So how realistically can they achieve this calm expression that is being asked of them? I mean, it sounds beautiful on paper, but a 15-year-old who's angry about a curfew isn't exactly prone to Socratic dialogue.
It is incredibly difficult. And it is a learned skill, not an innate one. That is exactly why the boarding environment is the laboratory for this.
Laboratory for arguing?
Constructive arguing, yes. The core mechanism of constructive challenge is separating your identity from your idea. When ego drives a conflict, a teenager feels that if their idea is rejected, they are rejected as a person.
Oh, man. Yeah.
The training here involves teaching a student to place the idea on the table between them and the authority figure and examine the idea together.
It's almost like intellectual judo.
That's a great way to put it.
Instead of just throwing themselves against the brick wall of a rule, which only leaves them with a bruised ego, they have to learn to use the institution's own language, like logic, respect, debate. They use that to engage with the wall.
And doing that requires a monumental shift in listening. The framework insists that expressing an opinion calmly is only half the equation.
What's the other half?
Active listening. Listening to the opposing perspective with a genuine willingness to be convinced.
It is hard.
Extremely. Because if you enter a debate only to win, you are still operating from ego. If you enter it to find the truth, you are practicing what Shaw preached.
Which means being open to the very real possibility that your newly formed, incredibly brilliant, independent thought might actually be wrong.
Exactly. That is the ultimate test of intellectual courage. Can you change your mind when presented with better evidence?
Right.
When students can do this, the dynamic of the entire institution shifts. The community is no longer threatened by friction. In fact, avoidance of conflict is actually what rots a community from the inside out.
Because everyone's just holding it in.
Right. When things go unspoken, resentment builds. But when a community encourages rigorous, respectful discussion, the ties between people become highly resilient.
But man, just listening to us talk about this makes me tired.
I know, it's a lot.
Engaging in constant critical thinking, stripping your ego from every argument, dealing with all the academic pressures, navigating the intense 24/7 social dynamics of living in a boarding house. I mean, it sounds exhausting.
It is a heavy lift.
If you are constantly analyzing and challenging your environment, that feels like a fast track to absolute cognitive burnout.
It absolutely can be. The cognitive load of constantly analyzing your reality is immense. And if there isn't a highly effective release valve built into the system, the student will simply snap under the pressure.
Right.
But this is where we uncover one of the most brilliant and honestly often misunderstood elements of Shaw's approach.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Shaw is widely remembered for his humor.
Yes, his wit was legendary.
But the humor wasn't just a byproduct of his personality. He actively used it to explore deeply serious, heavy topics. And in the context of this high-pressure boarding life, humor isn't just about telling jokes in the dorm late at night to blow off steam.
No, it serves a much bigger purpose.
It acts like a critical shock absorber on a violently bumpy academic road. Without it, the vehicle just shakes itself apart.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, to understand why this works, we really have to look at what humor actually does to the brain.
Okay, let's do that.
Resilience in a high-stakes educational setting isn't just about white-knuckling your way through exhaustion. That kind of brittle grit eventually breaks.
You just run out of willpower.
Exactly. True resilience requires cognitive flexibility. When a student is facing a massive setback, say they fail a crucial assessment, or they make a highly embarrassing social mistake in the dining hall, their brain's threat response naturally spikes.
It feels like a catastrophe.
Completely.
The stakes feel existential to them. Like, if I fail this math test, my whole future is ruined. That is the tunnel vision of a stressed mind.
But humor disrupts that tunnel vision.
How so?
When you can find the absurdity or the humor in a failure, you instantly lower the perceived stakes. It creates a psychological distance between the event and your identity.
Oh, I see.
It reframes the failure from being a fatal, permanent flaw to being just a temporary, manageable glitch in the system.
It stops that spiral of excessive self-criticism.
Precisely.
The deep dive points out how vital this is. Taking yourself too seriously is the thing that derails progress faster than almost anything else. If you lack that shock absorber, every single pothole feels like a literal car crash.
And this extends way beyond just the individual, too. It affects the whole group dynamic.
Because they're all living together.
Right. Maintaining a balance between intense effort and actual well-being is a collective responsibility in a boarding house. The environment thrives on lighthearted peer encouragement.
Like having each other's backs.
Yeah. When the collective culture uses humor to diffuse tension, it signals to everyone that it is inherently safe to struggle. It says, yes, this assessment is brutal, and yes, we're all totally exhausted, but we are in it together.
You're all stuck in the same bumpy vehicle, so you might as well laugh when the suspension bottoms out.
Exactly.
It keeps the mind adaptable instead of rigid. But let's zoom out from the theory for a second here. We have these massive, lofty concepts moving beyond passive memorization, mastering the judo of constructive challenge, weaponizing humor to prevent psychological burnout.
Big ideas.
Grasping these ideas intellectually is one thing, but how does a teenager actually practice them on a daily basis while living inside an institution that is heavily burdened by, well, in some cases, centuries of entrenched tradition?
That is where the environment itself proves its worth. Because intellectual confidence doesn't suddenly appear just because you read a Shaw play.
Right.
It is a muscle. It grows through repeated, low-stakes opportunities to explore ideas and face the consequences of your decisions. A boarding school provides a closed-loop system with hundreds of these micro-opportunities every single week.
We're talking about very concrete actions here, then.
Very concrete. Participating in a formal debate, standing up in a leadership meeting, taking actual terrifying responsibility for your own learning schedule rather than just waiting for a bell to tell you to open a book. And perhaps most difficult of all, learning to sit comfortably with uncertainty. When you step away from the rote memorization of the map, you realize the world is messy.
Yeah, the map was comforting.
It was. So students have to reflect on how their own thinking evolves over an entire semester or year. Because they live there 24/7, they can't just act intellectually brave in class and then retreat home. They have to inhabit that evolving mindset around the clock.
So what does this all mean for the school itself? I mean, if we have an entire student body actively practicing this intellectual courage, constantly questioning the why behind the rules, don't we risk tearing down the very traditions that give the institution its identity? If everyone is playing the role of George Bernard Shaw challenging the status quo, how on earth do you decide which traditions to keep and which to throw out? Doesn't the whole antique clock just fall apart?
This raises an important question, and honestly, it captures the ultimate delicate balancing act of institutional life.
Because the traditions are there for a reason.
Exactly. Long-standing routines, customs, and traditions exist for a highly pragmatic reason. They provide stability. They reduce cognitive load by automating certain aspects of communal living.
You don't have to decide when dinner is every night.
Right. You absolutely do not want to lose that grounding, because without it, you just have chaos.
Right.
But Shaw's philosophical lens reminds us that blind adherence to tradition is just another form of intellectual death. Progress fundamentally requires friction and change.
So it's not a zero-sum game between tradition and progress. A healthy community needs the gravity of tradition to keep from floating away, but it desperately needs the oxygen of development to actually breathe.
That's a perfect analogy. It is a continuous, active negotiation. The goal is for students to learn to respect and uphold the traditions that genuinely support the well-being and cohesion of the community.
The things that build a shared identity.
Yes. But simultaneously, they must recognize that systems created decades or centuries ago will inevitably fail to meet the needs of the present. The boarding school allows them to practice changing a system from within.
So instead of just complaining about a rule that feels outdated, they have to synthesize a better alternative, present it thoughtfully, and engage in mature, often tedious discussions about fairness, logistics, and responsibility.
Which is to say, they are practicing governance.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They're practicing how to evolve a culture without destroying its fabric.
Yeah.
And that takes us far beyond the walls of any boarding school.
Which is exactly why all of this matters so deeply for you, the listener. Because let's be honest, you might not have set foot in a boarding school in decades, or you may never have worn a school uniform in your entire life.
Most people haven't.
Right. But the underlying mechanics revealed in this deep dive are universal. The exact skills we've just dissected, making informed decisions when the map fails, adapting to high-pressure challenges without losing your mind, engaging in constructive dissent without destroying your relationships.
Those are life skills.
They are the precise survival skills required for navigating our current world.
Absolutely. Boarding schools, in this context, are merely high-contrast microcosms of broader society. Think about the modern workplace, our political systems, our digital communities.
They're all flooded with rigid structures and overwhelming pressures.
Yes. And true education, as framed by this analysis, is the empowerment to explore ideas within those structures. It is the realization that thoughtful questioning and intellectual courage are the only ways to avoid becoming a passive cog in someone else's machine.
It completely reframes the purpose of learning. You aren't just absorbing facts to pass the test of life. You are actively learning how to interpret the world and carve out your own agency within it. And the crucial takeaway from the document is that this level of growth requires a specific kind of setting. It states that the boarding life works because it offers a safe environment to practice these volatile skills.
A sandbox, basically.
Yeah, it provides a contained space to engage in heavy discussion, reflect on painful failures, and slowly build confidence in your own voice.
Which leaves us with a highly provocative thought for you to carry forward today.
Lay it on us.
If learning to truly think for yourself, to strip ego from debate, to challenge authority constructively, and to fail with grace, if that actually requires the safety of a structured community to practice in, where does that leave us as adults?
That's a great point.
Take a hard look at your own life right now. Where do you currently have a genuinely safe environment to practice respectfully challenging the status quo? Where is your laboratory to make mistakes, test radical new ideas, and exercise intellectual courage without the fear of absolute social or professional ruin?
Because if you don't have that space, if you are only ever performing for the final assessment, you might just be blindly following the ticking clock instead of figuring out how to build the better one.
Well said.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the mind of George Bernard Shaw and the hidden, profound mechanics of boarding school life. Keep interrogating the accepted ideas in your own world, and we'll see you next time.